Great. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Here.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks again for coming by. Congratulations on a pretty eventful 2018 so far.
Yeah.
So
Thank
you and I have known each other for a long time. I think it's been great and really impressive seeing how you've built up MuleSoft into this fantastic company, very successful IPO, and then amazing acquisition by Salesforce recently, which closed for $6.5 billion, which I think makes it the fourth largest infrastructure software M&A ever. Not an easy thing to do. So obviously, tremendous success, and by now, you just make it look easy. Everything looks easy all the way along.
It's been that way the whole time. Yeah.
So let's rewind the tape a little bit. Let's go back to the earlier days when everything wasn't as easy or wasn't as big. So you joined MuleSoft as CEO in early 2009, right?
Yeah.
Walk us back to that time. How big was the company then? And then what changed basically from those early days to the time and the success and size that you got to now, and you ran that 1 to 100 gauntlet and even bigger? What changed along the way, and give us a sense of the early situation?
Okay. So when I joined, we were the company had been in existence for 2 years. The founder, Ross Mason, was living in Malta at the time. Malta's off the coast of Sicily, I learned. It's off the coast of Italy. So Ross was living in Malta. It was the middle of the Great Recession, and we sold to banks and insurance companies. We were at 20 people. We'd been at 50 people before I joined. We were at 20. They had laid a bunch of people off. I joined with 20 people on board. We had about $1.5 million in revenue, and we were selling Mule as an open source ESB, selling a enterprise edition of Mule ESB, and so yeah, it was a bit of a fixer upper. There was a lot of work to do, and it was. I mean, it had a pretty good board already. It had a couple really good folks on the management team, and a little bit of money in the bank that was going to last us about 1.5 years. And the space was interesting. I'd been at SpringSource, which was open source also, so I knew the open source world a little bit. And the integration space is one of those great, massive opportunities that nobody had ever really figured out how to crack the nut on it. And frankly, in 2009, when I joined, it still was unclear how we were gonna be able to do that. And frankly, we were pivoting around quite a bit at the beginning. We went into application servers and did some stuff on top of Tomcat and kind of kept the lights on with Mule. And then what started happening over time is we built a cloud product. We started attaching to all of the SaaS integration out there. We got religion around APIs. That's when things started really clicking, as SaaS got massive and as APIs became a protocol, if you will. I mean, I think about APIs as being, the reason the internet blew up was HTML, and APIs are kind of the machine-to-machine version of HTML, and so now you have the ability of the machines to talk to each other in a productized fashion, where you could actually provide a platform, and that's what when we started seeing that, and then you go, however you measure it, $500 billion, $600, $700 billion a year being spent doing integration. It's the biggest unsolved IT problem of all time. And we weren't claiming it was a $700 billion market, but we were seeing that there was $700 billion in pain that we could shrink down. And so we just skated to where the puck was going, and all of that did a really good job on the product, I think, over time, to make it something that was bulletproof and something that was very much a bet your company on top of it. And then the other pivots that we had along the way were, we were selling, when I first joined, we were selling kind of $10,000 to $30,000 deals, and now we have many customers that are in the north of $5 million annual subscription revenue. Wow. And so we just moved the company very much to, we were always selling to the big enterprises. JP Morgan was one of our first customers, But to be able to actually sell to the CIO and talk about transforming the clock speed of their businesses, that took years of us getting the motion and the muscle to be able to do that.
How much of it do you think was waiting for that market readiness, the market reaching that maturity, the levels of complexity you talked about, versus you as the company figuring out how to best serve that need and recalibrating that?
It was both. I mean, we did a lot of, I think we did a lot of good work internally, but you also have to get lucky too, and you have to get lucky that the market's coming your direction in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of all that stuff happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges along the way, or some of the mistakes that either you had to learn how to better address or pivoted and focused on solving differently?
I think, so this was my first CEO gig, and so I think I made every mistake in the book. You know, and frankly, I kept telling everybody, I kept making them, right? Because being the CEO of a 20-person company and then being CEO of a 200-person company, you make a whole new set of mistakes. Yeah. And then when we were acquired by Salesforce, we were at about 1,300 people, you know, and I was making more mistakes at that level. So you just keep learning, and I wish somehow I could have run through one of these one time before really quickly, you know, just do like the simulation for 6 months and realize all those things and then do it right, you know. But some of the big mistakes early on were, or really throughout, frankly, were, one is I tend to stay with things, which I think is a better mistake to make than somebody who's doing the strategy du jour. I think that really will kill a company very quickly. But I would stay with, we would go after something, and if it wasn't working, we'd go to plan B on it. And what I learned is plan A is probably the best. You have a bunch of smart people, and you went after plan A, and if it's not working, it's probably not going to work. And so it's okay to try a plan B on a new product or something, or new pricing or whatever. But then if that doesn't work, you're probably, your probability of success at that point is very low, and so it's time to rip it off. Rip the Band-Aid off. So made that mistake. The other one I made a lot of was not hiring far enough out into the future with people. And I always had I'm a big fan of hiring the up-and-comers and giving people, really hiring top caliber candidates who are on their way to greatness. Because I found that a lot of times when you hire people that have already been there, maybe they don't have the fire in the belly anymore. Maybe they've got a set way of doing things and they're not willing to change. And so I liked the up-and-comers, and I still do. But what I also learned was I would make the mistake of kind of hiring for what we needed now, maybe what we needed in 6 months. And sometimes that train was moving. We were growing so fast, and that train was moving so fast that by the time a year or two had passed, all of a sudden it had scaled past this person's ability to grow and learn with the business. Yeah. And I wish I'd have hired a little more along the way, a couple years out. Yeah. Didn't need to hire somebody 20 years out, but hire somebody a couple years out.
Did the profile of what you look for in some of those key management hires change along that path from 1 to 100, from the earlier years to the later years, in, say, key roles like head of sales or head of finance? You look for different things? Yeah.
I mean, those are the two roles that I think I see entrepreneurs, young, early CEOs get wrong very frequently. So in those two, they're often the death of those companies, making some of those mistakes on those two jobs. So the first one, early on the CFO side, I think people sometimes try and get CFOs too early, and they're fine with somebody who's a really good accounting leader. What you need early is somebody who can just get the books done, and you want somebody who's a strategist, ideally, not somebody who's just counting the numbers. But then as you get later, you want somebody who's really strategic, who can really position the business well and really understands the levers in the business and help you, think about your CAC ratios and everything else. And the accountants often kind of aren't that type. Yeah. And so it's how do you make sure that you have the right person for the right stage in the business? If you get later on and you have somebody who's very much of an accounting person, you don't really get the value there. If early on they really are a big thinking, former investment banker who doesn't really want to worry about the nuts and bolts of lining up the accounting systems and getting those in place, those can set you up for problems.
Yeah.
So I see that being problematic. You'll hear CEOs talking about that. And then the one that I think is most problematic is the early sales hire. I see a lot of CEOs who think they have product market fit and really don't often. They'll hire that big time scale out head of sales who just is a crank turning head of sales, and usually I think that's usually problematic. They find out that they scale, they burn up tons of money. The sales leader is not able to help align you product market fit. They're not able to help with pricing strategies and all the really strategic things. We were extremely blessed. Early on, I hired a guy named Simon Parmet, who's our president, who runs the whole field organization, and he could do any job, frankly, in the world. He could run any company.
Did you just get lucky in hiring him, or
I'd
were you
known
looking
him-
for
I'd
something then that clicked?
I'd worked with Simon and I had worked together before, and
Okay.
I knew he was brilliant, and I know he's a people person, he's a process person, and he's incredibly strategic. I mean, he's one of these rare people you just don't find in one body usually. But he was amazing, and so early on in terms of finding product market fit, great for that. Early on in terms of figuring out how you got all the systems and processes lined up, phenomenal at that, and he was able to scale it all the way through.
Yeah.
That's a rare breed. So I don't think there are that many Simons out there. I'm in a CEO, but that's the other thing I would recommend for people is think about joining the CEO groups. I'm in one called 10X, which has been phenomenal. But those, we hear over and over again from CEOs in that group of the pain of having hired that early stage head of sales who hired too early, scaled it up too early, and really wasn't able to help you make the pivots that you need to do in the business.
Yeah.
That changes a lot over time.
Yeah. So one of the things I really like about the MuleSoft story is how thoughtful you were along the way in learning, recalibrating, adjusting things. A lot of companies along their path from 1 to 100 will be struggling with growth rates that are just slowing, or getting slower than they would like, or getting stuck in a rut. Any thoughts on ideas how you can jumpstart growth faster without just jacking up the burn, right? Because that's always the tension for a lot of the companies in that 1 to 100 segment. I know if I just spent a lot more money, I could hire a much bigger sales and marketing team. But you usually don't have unlimited capital resources.
Yeah.
The idea is, what can help jumpstart that growth besides just more raw spend?
That's a hard problem. Math is a pain. So I think it's more a question of when you apply it and how comfortable you are. We had several periods. I mean, we've been doing this for 9 years since I was there, and we definitely reinflected on several different occasions. We'd find places where we felt like things were getting too wobbly and it feels very much like the wheels are starting to come off the car, and we would back off a little bit in the growth and make sure we had our feet under us, and then we would push back down again. And frankly, we shouldn't have had to do that. It should have been just nice, steady acceleration all the way through. But again, we were all learning, and things are changing in the market. Products at a certain point, not at a certain point.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any magic for it. I think that just be careful about going too hard down on it too fast. And then the flip of it is, I'm fairly conservative on the spend side and really driving the business. We brought in NEA as an investor, and the board member from NEA, he'd come in and he'd look at our CAC ratios, which had always been above 1, and he'd say, "What are you doing? You guys have these incredible renewal rates, these incredible net renewal rates with add-on, and we need to drive that number down," which always felt, drive that number down. Really? We want to drive it down. And we would sit in every board meeting and say, it's still too high, it's still too high. And we keep pushing on the gas, and we knew that we had found it. He knew we had found it. We weren't quite as sure that we were confident. But we had this great session with T. Rowe Price looking to invest in us before we went public, and we had a plan that had us growing 92% the year we were into going public, and the PM there said, "That's too hot, and the wheels are going to fall off, and I don't like seeing companies at this scale growing that fast." And I agreed with him. I said, it really is an aggressive plan. And then we proceeded to grow 92% that year going into the IPO, you know, and that was just a little bit of leap of faith and a little bit just the board, and it's particularly this one board member from NEA just kind of pushing to say, we can do it, let's go for it. Doing that without spend though, certainly in the enterprise space, really hard to do. It's, you know, it's just expensive. You know, you just got to know that when you're pouring the gasoline on top, you've got to know that the burn is efficient. And that's the part that's where I think it gets so dangerous. You know, people get one or two big customers and they think they've hit jackpot, and those are just, you know, false positives. It actually doesn't mean anything, and all of a sudden you put it all the way down. You know, it's like, so it's that judgment call about when you should have confidence and when you shouldn't, and those are hard.
Yeah, and when it's time to step on the gas, you feel like you should know at that point. You should be able to see the metrics and the productivity. Yeah.
You should. I still had a very hard time putting it all the way through the floorboard. You know, it was hard for me. It wasn't natural for me to push it down that hard. Yeah. I had to have other people behind me. Yeah. Go.
So if you could go back in time to, say, the beginning of when you got back into MuleSoft, all that you know now and have experienced now that you've run through the path, what advice would you give yourself in those earlier years that you didn't know that?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be very specific to me and MuleSoft, but for me, I was, so I had this professor in business school, Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Built to Last, some of those awesome business books that some of you may have read. And I've stayed in touch with Jim over the years, and I love the guy, drank gallons of the guy's Kool-Aid. And his big thing was, you know, it's all who you get on the bus. And for me, when I joined MuleSoft, I'm not a Java developer. It was hardcore Java development capabilities that I really couldn't drive the product. And I'm actually very much of a product person. And so I couldn't drive the product, and I'm not a sales leader. You know, usually often CEOs either come out of the technical product side, tech CEOs product side, or come down the sales side. I was neither. And so the place I was going to apply myself to build the company was all around people and culture. Because that was where I could add the most value and put my passion around that aspect of it. Yeah. And so I focused on that very heavily, very early on. And I think I would say, and I'm a marketer too, so I focused on that. I've spent some of my calories on the marketing side too. But I would say, you know, most CEOs have that one thing that they really care about. You know, they love being out selling. They love working on the product. And the one thing I'd say is, my advice would be careful about how that scales for you, and make sure that you have people that are going to really start picking up the load for you. Because what I did was, on the people and the hiring side, I dug in there, and that was my thing. And I didn't bring in early enough the number two to go drive that, the HR, the talent leaders, to go drive that. And I kind of put all that on my shoulders.
That's who became your trusted number two, that HR person to handle that.
But very late, way too late. And it's something that I should have been, as much as I cared about, as much time as I was spending on it, I still should have been pushing that over to another person so I could stay more broad across the business. I was a little too focused there. So I think the thing that you're best at, you're going to gravitate toward, and you almost have to work hardest in that area to have somebody who you can totally trust to then take it and run with it. Because once you get to scale, you become the bottleneck in that area.
Yeah, you know? I've seen and I've heard that a number of times. That the strength of the CEO can ironically be the weak spot of the company. Yeah. Because they focus so much there when you have so many errors.
And it was for us, and we fixed it. You know, probably 2 years ago, I brought in a great leader of the talent acquisition side, which is where I spent a lot of my time is on hiring and how we hire and that whole process. But too much of it. You know, it should have been something that I should have had. Somebody who was coming along with me the whole time and was getting all that DNA, and they would have been carrying the water for me on that.
Yeah. So yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, congrats again on everything that you've built up, all that you learned and grew, all the lessons and insights along the way from 1 to 100, and then well beyond that. So thanks for chatting with us today.
Absolutely. And all right. Thanks, Greg.
Best wishes for you.
Thanks.
Thanks.